Welcome back. This is FPS, and this is my testimony of Flat Earth and the Bible and my life and who you're listening to slightly. You're seeing there my own handwriting. This was a sheet that I put together after about 18 months of study, and I just had to organize it so I could timeline it for myself, and that's what we're going to study. But for me, when I was 18, I left home, never went back, went to the Army, I was a combat medic. I came out, I graduated high school with a 1.98 GPA, and they told me I was retarded every day of my life. Every single day of my life in school, I was bullied and beaten. Kids, teachers. The teachers used to scream at me when I was a child. I don't remember why. I just remember I didn't have to look at anybody to listen to them or hear what they were saying, and for some reason that just made them irritated. This was what I got after like 7 years. I went to junior college, started from Math A and English A, and started getting a 4.0 and started realizing I might be able to go somewhere academically. This is a gold standard of personal training. It's a step above personal training. It's what you get with a 4-year degree in kinesiology and exercise physiology from the #1 place you can go to. We were taught straight out of the master's program, Dr. Brooks from UC Berkeley, who leads all of America in physiology research. And I left there and became the youngest trainer at the highest end club in the city. And then after that, I got into the, that's a tranny right there. I went through the hardest selection process of my life outside of being a Christian, or up to that point. And I got into the #1 school in the world for what I do, which is the #1 school in the world for a lot of reasons. And it tied in nicely because it was the end of my original beginning in the Army. When you're a combat medic, it's the heart and beginning of where nursing was invented. And then when you go to UCSF, it's also where nursing was invented. So I was kind of full circle. And then I was never going to be held back. I catapulted out of that place as fast as possible. I was done before I left. The Western model of medicine, I realized, was just killing people. So about the last year of my school, I found this book. And that's a letter confirming that there you go. Oh, my Lord. This is to say, you got your thing. Good job. And then this is about a timeline that I wrote at some point where it got too much. And you'll see this is like 17 hours of conversation. It's a timeline. It's an order. I started dropping off once I got to this 1260 days and the 70 generations that the alien or the what we think are aliens were bound for 70 generations from Enoch, and they came out in 1850, and that's when we started getting all this knowledge coming out. Remember, he talked to the Greys. I call the Greys the people in the middle. It's a binary world. God's white, darkness is blackness, and the Greys are in the middle. They're the undecided ones. They're the ones we're all fighting over. I'm decided already, and so is the devil, and so is half these jerks. And you got to pick a side, brother. You gotta pick a side. You already picked a side. You're working for one side or the other. You don't even know it. All encompassing. Okay. The book that I got that cracked my world in 2000, and I might have been 13, was this Graham Hancock book. I call it Who Built the Pyramids. You'll find, as you listen to me more and more, that my wheelhouse is talking about the body and food, but especially also in terms of the conspiracy theories and things. I hacked that junk a long time ago, and you're going to want to hear about how to eat and how not to eat, because despite the fact that we're all poisoned, there's a way around it, and I'll share that with you. I knew that the math of the world did not add up. Nothing made sense. Nothing adds up. Literally, the math never worked. It didn't work in a hospital. It doesn't work in space. It doesn't work in evolution. The one thing that I did believe in was evolution, even though I was always working on my own theories about why it fit in or how it worked, as above, so below, where was the fractal pattern, and there was none. And that, when nothing adds up, you got all this education, you can see through it. You got to remember that when you're at a #1 school, university, you have access to all their research in their intranet. And all of the medical research that goes through all of California and most of the world, all the way back to Virginia, when you start getting into Johns Hopkins, it's all UCSF research. So I could just read it all and do all that stuff at a moment's notice. The education, is lightning speed and hardcore science, nothing but hardcore science. I was a hardcore scientist. And I didn't ever question evolution. I questioned nothing until I found this fact that we didn't know how we built the pyramids. And that blew my mind. And I took Graham Hancock's influence and I began to move forward with my education. The concept that never left me was that we're currently being tormented toward technology. It does absolutely nothing for us. We haven't solved a single thing, yet we feel like we're on this bleeding cutting edge of something that proves that we're better than our fathers, which is retarded. It just erases history and erases our fathers and makes us illegitimate children running around the world lawlessly. You'll notice that the devil hates weed. Graham Hancock has a huge testimony of going on DMT, and the serpent literally put him in a vice grip time and time again, trying to get him off weed, and then he left it finally. And that's why I started smoking weed, 100%. I knew that devil knew something. And that's where I came to contact with cannabis, and that's a whole nother testimony, but I call it God's weed that ain't never killed man, and it's the unkillable weed. God's unkillable weed that's never killed man. It's a fruit of the ground, and it's totally healthy medicine. Stuff it in your face, and screw the devil. The two things that never left me when I first started was Linda, I can't remember her name, Elmeyer. She was assistant for Von Braun. She said the final card they would play is aliens. And I knew that aliens were out there. Something was out there. So that was a huge thing where now you can figure out, okay, well, they're not aliens, so what are they? And then Dr. Richard Day. That was big. I hit that really early. These two never left me. Dr. Richard Day, you have to listen to these 4 things. He has a very, very interesting testimony. He talks about a time in 1969. He was sitting in a class like I did, these medical classes where somebody just comes in, is the expert of the world. He talks for an hour and a half. You got to remember that I'm sitting at the world's leading institution for research where they discovered things like HIV and AIDS. So when the person comes in to tell us about AIDS, they don't just have like a guy talk to you. They have the person do their expertise, and you sit there and talk to the world's leading scientist, break it down from the beginning. It's all lies. But at the time, this is the environment you sit in. And so this guy, this teacher who went in there and started talking, said, okay, everybody put away your pencils and your notebooks. I'm just going to talk. I got to get some things out. And he just started breaking down the plan from 1969 until today. And it's like all those other things we've seen, the predictions. We're so far behind. You're so far behind. I'm so far behind. Catch up. Just consume it as fast as possible. It'll do its work. The truth does its work. But as I noted here, I felt like weed was the great deprogrammer. And that's what goes on when we smoke weed. We watch TVs and stuff, and it doesn't program us. It has some sort of blunting effect, and that's why the devil hates it, because he's got to program us to miss the rapture. And this is all pre-Flat Earth. So this is all the stuff that I looked at before I looked at Flat Earth, and I started looking at stuff at 2012. I never went on the internet, told Graham Hancock's book, ever. And then after all this, there was just a lull of, okay, well, what's next? I didn't look at 9/11 or any of the governmental, political influences whatsoever. I was just doing alternative stuff. I really liked the wizardry and Iboga. We'll get to that. I did realize that the moon was weird. You had a lot of stuff. This is before anybody did the heat tests. It was the gravity of it was weird. Everything about it was weird. And I knew that the questions like that shouldn't be open. When you're sitting there in the world of science and people are talking to you about every great detail, and then you look at the moon and no one knows nothing, you know it's a joke. So in the golden mean, I hit that. I knew that Father God was real at this point, okay, and that's where I started going. All this time I was rejecting Jesus. Like straight up, Jesus didn't live, Jesus wasn't a man. And towards the end, that was kind of in my heart. Until I got to the hydrogen car guy here, I started going, okay, maybe there's something else to it. But rejecting Jesus it's ubiquitous. We all do it. We're all born into rejecting Jesus, and until you get over it, he offends you, period. He's a rock of offense. He laid down a challenge upon all men that emasculated every one of us. He's a man's man. He took it like a man. He didn't cry out. He laid his life down and hated the shame of it. And we can't match it. It's offensive. So there's a point where knowledge just overcomes it, and then you have to hit the Bible. And then God will walk you through the Bible. Even when you start reading the Bible and believing every word, he's not going to hit you up front with Jesus. He's still going to tell you who he is and who you are. And he's going to show you the verses that work on your heart, because he needs you to be holy from the inside. In the Book of a Cube, this was about the time where I could sit through and maybe, I never watched anything, but, fast forward it. I watched all of YouTube. And we'll talk about how YouTube's changed. By 2015, it completely changed. So this is all 13 and 14. And the Book of a Cube was all satanic stuff, but it was talking about intelligence and life and the patterns and the fractals and the design. And so I was hitting on the design real big, and that leads to evolution. Aliens, for me, the concepts were they were everywhere. The unexplainable thing was the cattle mutilations. And then if they're spirits, why are they manifesting to take flesh and blood? And why are they everywhere and where we're not acting like they are? I mean, everyone's saying, well, what if we get proof of aliens? What are you talking about, dude? We've had more proof of aliens than we have anything else. Iboga goes along with DMT. Okay, Iboga is the DMT form. It comes out of India or something. It's like the poppy plant. I can already tell this is going to need another video. When Graham Hancock goes into DMT, he sees the serpent who begins to minister to his heart to do evil. The Iboga people, it's about the DMT trip is like about 4 to 6 hours. The Iboga is 24 hours. These people take Iboga and they fast for a whole day, doing nothing but literally living in some other three-dimensional world. And all the experiences are pretty much just the same, like little beans hop up your nose and start fixing you. But this was like an ego fix. There was something here that was like a mental mechanical fix, as opposed to the DMT in Peru, which seemed to be like a heart-centered spirit path. Iboga seemed to be way more powerful. And the people who were coming out of it started talking about discovering the power of their words. And this is the word, right? Word, God. God is word. So I started tapping into this and realizing that Crowley, with incantations, is where he was getting his power. And so I started seeing this pattern where it's our voice that is the pinnacle of creation, and that we really just toss it aside, even though we'll be judged for every muttered utterance. And then here's a list of all the names that I started getting into that really profoundly affected me. Steiner, Tessa, Leeds Scowlin, Coral Castle, Edgar Gacy, the Catholic seer, and he came up with 1260 years. And that's when I underlined that, because that showed up later in the Bible. So I was getting these concepts, even though I didn't know where they started. Then I started seeing the flood myths everywhere, Gilgamesh and everything, and this started to really just tie in with a timeline. And then you go through the empires, it started with Atlantis and then Babylon, and then all the empires after that. Had a lot to do with clairvoyance, had a lot to do with incantations and wizardry. All 7 kingdoms were of men and of evil. And if you see that Revelation has 7 churches, those 7 churches were brought up one by one to meet each kingdom as it came up, with its challenges and all. And we'll get back to that, because that's huge. The ancient flying machines was just like the pyramids. How did they know it? Who are these Vicarace, or the white men who were teaching them all and then disappearing? Physics, medicine, food, pills, plants, they're all poisoned. Everything's poisoned. So that was tripping me out as well. I'm going to end it here and try to go quicker on the next round, okay? Hang with me there. Thanks for listening. And Maranatha. Welcome back. This is FPS. This is part 2 of my Flat Earth testimony. Picking up where we left off. Remember that I was struggling with, after all my science, nothing adds up. Nothing makes sense. So I returned to practicality. I dumped all theory. I recommend you do the same. Rebuild your understanding with what's practical. Like the flat earth is practical, and that's basically the fundamental aspect of it. I was carrying around with me this Dr. Richard Day thing, which I also recommend. You find one of those There's many of them, sorts of different kinds, where people are testifying of basically prophesying of what the beast was going to do. And it always ends in evil. There is nothing about it that is just random evolutionary things. It is a plan against God, against Jesus, evil, so that nobody's saved. They want us all to slip past the rapture. I didn't really understand that at the point, but I did know that there was something about God, very inherent in all this. So I was rebuilding practically my understanding of science, using things like the golden mean, just rebuilding slowly. Things like Steiner, Tesla, Leeds Scanlon. Now, Rudolf Steiner I had a deep personal relationship with prior to anything. He was probably my first guy, and if I went back and asked me, again, nothing added up. But one of the things that really triggered me was raw milk. So raw milk and Rudolf Steiner and nothing added up pretty much led to this research, which this is a list of research that took me between February and Thanksgiving of 2014. So I did this in about 6 to 9 months, and that's why I came back and wrote it all down one day so I could keep track of it. I knew that medicine was not great. I'd come from it. I knew it. I practiced it. But it was the last one that I really was like, man, that's against us. I knew food was poison, and the pills weren't good. The plants are poisoned, and physics, it's all wrong what they tell you. Confusion of spirit, shadow of death. That's for the word. That's another one. So then there's a guy out there who built a hydrogen car in 1996. His name is Stan Meyer. Now, at this point, I, of course, didn't believe Jesus Christ as my Lord, but I saw this, and this was in 1996, and it was on 60 Minutes. He was, like, hiding out. He thought he was born in the 70s gas crisis, or this knowledge for him was, and it took him 15 years, and then he's trying to hide it and keep it, and he ended up trying to do a deal with the devil, and they poisoned him to death over dinner, and he died. And then they buried the water car, which is what they do with all forms of technology and everything that we try to do, is they'll take it. They'll kill you and they'll take it. So I tracked a lot of that technology going through and leaving us. And then once you kind of pile that stuff up, you realize that we're being kept from all the good stuff. None of the good stuff is coming through to us. So that was a big one, learning that we had a hydrogen car, or any other kind of car. Because once you think about the internal combustion engine, it's literally the most damaging, painful, do nothing for us, but bleed us dry invention, and we can't get off of it. So you know that we never will. So that was about the time I was thinking, well, I'm not going to end up an inventor here. I'm not going to end up with money. I got to find another way. And then here's the one that really blew my mind, because I was a medical guy. The AIDS blunder. Watch that on YouTube instantaneously. It's about AIDS, HIV being fake. The guy who made it, the guy who made that movie, or the two guys, it's not even a movie, it's just it's two guys sitting around, two doctors having a conversation. And they were there from the beginning of AIDS. And they talk about how it can't possibly be, because the moment that the body has created an antibody to an antigen, the body is impervious to that antigen. So that's why the AIDS test is difficult or impossible to do, because they're testing for a flu virus in your blood, and we can't do that. We know that. So I think that this is when I began thinking that viruses were man-made. Now, I knew that they were trying to get us sick and fat and die in hospital and death, but I didn't know that maybe malaria, any virus, like viruses shouldn't exist. Viruses look like a machine, a nanomachine. They act like a nanomachine, and they probably are. So the fact that herpes would be with you for life when it's just like AIDS as a retrovirus, I emailed the man at Berkeley and asked him a short question that said, well, if that's true, what about this? And he wrote me back the shortest email in the world. It said, well, maybe herpes is not a retrovirus then. So then he disappeared. His email disappeared. I could never find him again. This is when I started thinking about traveling to the moon and NASA. Now, despite all my science inclinations, I had zero towards telescopes or the sky or the moon or the sun or the stars or NASA or space or Star Trek or Star Wars. I read another book I'm not going to tell you about because there's too many secrets in it and you'll find out too much about me. But the science fiction is always true, right? So why haven't we gone back to the moon? This was a big question for me. And then I thought, like most people do, which is wrong, that the Jews brought down the Twin Towers. They did not. People who called themselves Jews did, so that we would figure that out and then bomb Israel, which is what is about to happen as you keep trying to blame the Jews for everything. That's their plan. And you're feeding right into it. The Jews, you don't even know who a Jew is. Don't call yourself a Jew. Stop calling yourself a Jew. You don't know what a Jew is. You don't know who the 12 tribes are. You don't know where they are. Nobody does. They're hidden on earth. And the people who are calling themselves Jews aren't. Before we leave, health, AIDS, herpes, and then cancer. Uniploidy. There is a guy in Texas. He is been doing this for a long, long time. I believe his name's Brzezinski. He's in Texas. This was a tremendous education for me. Because he has something called neoplastins, which have been curing cancer since the 60s or the 50s, and he's been doing it in Texas. This was a huge education for me because how did they shut him down and shut him up? And that's where I went to the Federal Reserve. And then fluoride, we'll get to the Federal Reserve in a second. Fluoride, you need to read this too. You need to watch The Great Culling. Okay, this is huge. It's bigger than Christmas. I will tell you the cure to fluoride. You're not going to believe me. I'll tell you the cure to all the physical poisons. It's just one thing, and you're done. The Federal Reserve was huge because the moment that I realized in 1871, the federal government, the United States federal government, became the United States corporation and began to take everything I was worth at birth in a bank account and then pay me out of it. And if I died or didn't make enough wages before that, then they kept all that money, and then they had to pay the Federal Reserve interest, which means that every dollar I got, the Federal Reserve was getting $1 plus. So that's what we call a debt note or a debt-based society, is that the dollar in your hands is a debt note. It's not actually money. It's something you have to pay back plus. And you have that agreement with your federal government, United States corporation. That's why they pretend to own us, because we went along with it. It's horrible. So then the Sandy Hook was fake. Yeah, I didn't care what about Sandy Hook. But the fact that it was fake blew my mind. And then I was thinking, okay, they want our guns. And that's really, I don't really know why they're so afraid of us having guns, other than the martial law. We're going to be harder to eradicate, but not impossible. What they really want is a social mindset that's against guns, so that when your American neighbor has 15 sheriffs shooting at his house, you go, oh, it's because he had a gun. It's because he's an American, and you are a United States citizen, not an American. You defected from America and your freedom and your rights, and you went into a private corporation because they have, like, I don't know, food and water probably coming up, and we're not going to have any. We're going to welcome the New World Order. So then this kind of goes spiritual. This was back to, I think, the Sky Child and the Giants was like, okay, what is going on here, especially with the aliens and the grays. And then I looked into evolution, and it took me, just like Flat Earth, it was about 9 seconds. And I thought, oh my Lord, what have I been believing? If you haven't become hip to this, it really explains a lot of stuff. It goes back to that Dr. Richard Day sort of thing, where the plan, the conspiracy, we are faced with a conspiracy so big, the guy said that we wouldn't even believe it. J. Edgar Hoover, man is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists, which is all real true. This is kind of where it starts. This is Tony Stark. He is Iron Man. The Marvel comics are always written after the fallen angels and the players who try to bring them into being. This guy's Scientology. This is Werner von Braun, who told us aliens are fake. This is Walt Disney, who is now perverting all mankind, and Aleister Crowley, who led them through with the Book of the Law and the Beast. Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic is about these guys in the desert creating NASA. It is a mind opener. When I went from there, I went and I saw a testimony by a guy named Mark Clementine. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and his testimony was about coming out of the Illuminati. Now, at this point, I didn't understand Pizzagate or child pedophile anything so much, but I did start to get into the prince of the power of the air and the greatest trick ever pulled on man, and thinking about the final deception. If aliens were the last card, how are they going to fool us? And putting that all together. I have here a verse written in Ephesians 5:12. Let me check that out real quick. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. And that's a bit of their advantage, is doing unspeakable things. It's hard to tell people of unspeakable things. But to get from the end of that, from February to Thanksgiving in 2014 is when I came to Christ. It was a really hard time. It was unbelievable. And then he spent about 5 months reconciling what I had come to understand. And then I finally was back on YouTube looking at stuff, and the flat earth was all up in my face. I rejected it, and then finally saw the stuff. Mark Sargent was probably the biggest influence, and it was pretty quick. Once I saw the azimuth stuff, it was all over with. And then I started looking at 9/11. And 9/11 was a trip because you could find stuff at that point in time you can't find anymore, like stuff about the black vans going in and out at the dark of night for weeks beforehand. And I'll wrap it up with the big advantage was at this point, the flat earth, and you could see I was out of the world. I was done with the world, which was exactly my barrier to accepting the real fullness of the baptism in the Word back when I was 23. Was I thought the Father was going to reward me with worldly gifts, but it says right there in the Bible, He does not give the way the world gives. So when I got baptized and I was reading the Bible, the Lord had another plan for me. He wanted me to go get educated and struggle through, and then come to rejecting the world of my own accord. All those things I wanted, I didn't necessarily not want them anymore, but it was the biblical concept of friendship with the world is enmity with God. And the pride of life, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, these things are not of God. These things are of the world. And I was a pretty lusty guy. I had a hard time reconciling my body's needs with my spiritual needs. But as you get off of all the poison and all the television, you realize that the TV is just like pumping hormones into you that overwhelm you. At certain moments, you just keep giving over to them. You have to cut all off and step away. But as I did that, I was very happy now to leave the world and not want any part of that, even though maybe it meant riches and everything else leaving too. But I found mastery of my own temple in abandonment of all the electronics in my face and most of the food. They are washing us in hormones and hormone precursors. I suggest you look into something called metalloestrogens, and I think that's what they're chem spraying. Everything here is a whole video, right? The whole book. So I'm going to try to polish this off and just say thanks for listening. That's pretty much my flat earth testimony. The testimony for all of us, I think it's about the same. We all went through and saw stuff that blew our mind. It was real. And then we came last to the flat earth. This thing over here is David Palladdi's Missing Children. He's looking into like a predator creature that's like Bigfoot but can disappear, and that's how they get them. And that goes back to, why are they cattle mutilations? What is their interest in us and our flesh and our DNA and our blood? Don't know really. I still don't entirely know, and I don't want to confuse you by postulating. But I think that wraps it all up. I really appreciate you listening. I'm FPS. One day I'll tell you also what FPS stands for. One of the ones is first person speaking. So that's who I am. Got to speak up. Don't hide your light under a bushel as best you can. Just know that there is no concept of required education or understanding that is beyond your mind. You can understand everything. And the Lord wants you to. He who seeks will find. Maranatha.